We got one person watching.
And if you're just joining us, we are early in the morning. Instead of cartoons, we used to have cartoons here, but now you're stuck with another episode of the Graphic Man show, and I am joined with the great Paulo Costa. How's everything over there?
It's good. It's good. It's a weekend, and I'm finally taking a break. My new job is kind of weird. I'm working from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. So I'm tired from working at a time that I'm usually not used to working at for the last few years. I've been working from home as a freelance journalist, and now having another job. Still working from home, but it's always on.
Well, before we get really rolling, you were on our Wednesday night broadcast, and you showed a Flash Gordon book, and I thought it looked obviously the first page is going to look similar to anything we have over here. This is what we have in America. It's the same one.
No, it's not the same one, but that's Titan. That's the British version.
Okay.
Checker Books had done an attempt at doing a Flash Gordon collection about 15 years ago, and I bought the first two. I think that Titan book is more recently, and Titan is a British publisher.
Well, it's pretty slick, I gotta say. This is what I guess they call this the presentation. Mm-hmm. It's phenomenal. It's got little gold, flashy. That probably added another $5 to the overall price, but it has great illustrations in it. But I always noticed, I recognized this, when you showed that. I don't know what language yours was in.
No, it is. Checker Books is an American publisher.
Okay.
And I should have kept up with them because a few years later, they published a collection of Happy Comics' Alien Legion, which I actually have a Brazilian version of. And I kind of missed out, and now I can get an Alien Legion collection. But Checker Books, I think they're out of business now. They tried to do an American library sort of collection like IDW ended up doing. And that's where I got that one. Titan is the British, the one you have. They're a British publisher, but they have all their stuff available in America, which is good because I got some Titan books myself, especially collections of the Transformers the Transformers Marvel comic and the Marvel UK comic, which they were the first to reprint.
Well, I love Flash Gordon. I do have one. I have one problem with some of the logic. Here it starts off back in the 1930s. The whole world realizes something is wrong. They're in danger. Their death could be imminent. So Flash Gordon goes out there to see what's going on. Then he spends day after day hanging out with all these scantily clad women and strange aliens, and at some point you go, hey, wait a minute, what about your buddies back on Earth? Have we died while you're doing all this stuff over here? So I'm just picking on it a little bit, but it does make you wonder the urgency of his mission. So, but why don't you go ahead and show what you were going to show real quick, and I'll put you on full screen.
Okay, so let's see. I got a large pile again. One of the things that I notice on shows like this, where everybody shows their comics, everybody wants to show off their collections, which is good. But even in their 40s and 50s, people are still going after the original editions of the comics that they owned as kids, or that they missed out on when they were younger. And it's kind of a time-consuming hobby, and I'm sure the thrill of the hunt adds to all the excitement. But in my case, I just want to read everything that was published before I was around, or that I missed off the first time around, either because I didn't have money or because I wouldn't have been old enough to appreciate it. Like I had Watchmen on the stands when I was 10. If I had read Watchmen at 10, I would not have understood most of the things that Alan Moore was talking about. So it would be only a few, it was only 5 years later that I finally was able to read it. But if we want to show our comics to new generations, so that they can understand what we read when we were younger, or what it was like growing up, the way that we told stories, what were we telling stories about, they need to be available now where the younger readers are, so that they can find it and buy them. We might have to explain some things to them, but it's important that this stuff exists. And in this case, I'm very glad that things like this, for example, exists. This is a fairly recent, when was the 30th anniversary? So yeah, it was probably 2008 edition of the Saber graphic novel, one of the first comics to be marketed as a graphic novel in 1978 by Eclipse. This one was published by Desperado in 2008. It's slightly smaller. It's about a little bigger than what the Brazilian comics that we had. The hardcover Italian books are kind of the same size, and it's got the whole story with Saber. Great work written by Don McGregor, Black Panther fame, with art by Paul Galassi, which I always love. This is the first page. If you start, I think it really pulls you in, even in black and white, and even today it still holds up. The themes of the story, they're still very much driven by early understanding of ecology and our place on the planet, and worrying about pollution and what the oil industry, how the oil industry affected our daily lives and its impact on civilization. And this ends up being one of those semi-post-apocalyptic futures where there's technology, corporations ruling everything, and then a bunch of people who are very much in a like in a Western set. They kind of see themselves as being in a Western. Civilization is probably at its end, and they're trying to survive as best they can in a hostile environment.
Yeah, you can't beat the art. The art is just absolutely fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So I think something like Saber is one of those series that needs to be kept in print for new generations to enjoy. And I'm very glad I found this copy. There's a series that I only heard about when I started reading in English. I didn't know about. Mike Grell had some stories published in the Kids when I was younger, and only found out about John Sable Freelance many years later. I thought I would never read it until when IDW and the person that was involved with the original First Comics decided to bring back their old material into print. First Comics said when they went out of business, there was a problem who owned the rights to 20 of the series. Both John Sable, also Grim Jack, and what was the other one Mike Rowland was involved with? Star Slayer. And John Sable in particular has a very distinctive look. The design was created to fool superhero fans into buying it, although there's no superhero action at all. It's just a soldier of fortune, as we can see here. But while this is an adventure series and he gets into into a lot of shooting and fighting and espionage and stealing stuff, this is not a story about that. This pulls you in a way that you don't expect it. You get fooled into buying this, and then you stay because you actually like what you're reading. And this is a very personal story about the main character. John Sable is a man very much affected by his past, and he's living in New York. He has a secret identity as a children's writer, which is famous. He calls himself BB Flam, puts on a blonde wig. Let me see if I can find a page. Here it is. and and he writes children's books. But he is also known for his Soldier of Fortune work. So he can't let it be known that a mercenary also writes kids' books.
Does he go into detail about not wanting to be associated with the alter ego, or like Peter Parker would constantly let you know what he's thinking? Does this character go, boy, I can't let them find out I write children's books because A, B, and C?
They explain it, but the identities don't get involved. It's not the only person who knows the truth is his publisher. He only disguises himself as Baby Flam when he needs to promote his new books. It turns out his books are very, very popular. They're based on children that he used to tell his children. But he's living in New York. He's famous. He's rich, and he's not happy. He wants to go back to Africa, where he was the most happy and the most sad. He's not allowed to go back to South Africa. It's considered persona non grata. His family was killed there by other mercenaries, and he killed the people responsible. But he still wants to go back there. It's where you can say that's where he left his soul. And we're going through all of these adventures that we see here. Always plenty of action, and we're always rooting for him that he can find happiness, and that he can have a happy ending that he deserves.
Well, looks good. So maybe you might say he wants to avoid the fame, because like a famous person can't always step out and go get groceries without being hounded. So maybe that's part of some of his thinking.
He doesn't go out as Baby Flam, so he doesn't have to worry about the fame. But the fact that he has to live in New York, where he is making money and where he has his jobs, it's not where he wants to be. He wants to be back in Africa, doing safaris with his family, which he can't because his family was killed. So it's a man searching for happiness and not being able to find it, and it's very tragic. And that's the reason why you keep reading John Sable Freelance, even after realizing that you've been fooled by the mass design into buying a not superhero comic.
Right. By the way, that's set in Africa, and so
it's set in New York. It's set in New York. The flashback scenes are set in Africa. Then he moves around a bit depending on the storyline.
The other night you were on our broadcast, and I said you showed a text story, and it had a picture, and I said, "What is this setting?" And you told me it was the Canadian border. When I ask for a setting for a story of one of the more European titles, it's not that I'm the ugly American thinking that every story should be in America. I am just amazed that European writers would choose America as a setting when I figure they've got all kinds of great countryside and the Alps and things of that nature in Europe. But why do they find, like cowboy stories in America so interesting? So would you say, on average, the average European writer, where does he, I mean, a guy from Belgium is going to write about Belgium and so forth. But is Africa the strong contender for faraway locations and locales? Or is it really like the Wild West of America?
It depends on the type of story that you want to tell. For example, Corto Maltese, he does spend a lot of time in Africa and Arab countries, and North Africa. The story is set around the 1920s and 30s. Corto Maltese is the son of a gypsy woman. It's not very clear which country he owes his allegiance to. He travels around, he meets people, gets into adventures. Hugo Pratt's style is not one that's very dynamic. It's more about the interaction between characters. The drama is very much from suspense of of how the characters interact. There are many Western stories made by European authors, like Tex in Italy and Blueberry, made in France, was created by Jean Giraud, who is better known for his science fiction work as Mobius. Giraud was pointed out to the creator of the concept, writer Jean-Michel Charlier, by a Belgian writer artist called Joseph Gillin, who is known by his pen name Gigi. That's a thing. That's a thing that a lot of French-speaking cartoonists do. They still see themselves as cartoonists, so they have this short signature. So Joseph Gillin does the phonetic pronunciation of his initials, and it becomes Gigi. And in one of those albums, a still young Giraud was his assistant, and the album series was called Jerry Spring. It was one of the first successful long-running Western series made in Belgium. And when Charlier was coming up with his own Western after traveling in the United States, Gigi told him, "Hey, I have this kid here. He's in his early 20s. Giraud, why don't you take him on and see if he can draw something, if he can do a series for you?" And that series is still going on. Of course, both Charlier and Giraud are dead now, but the publisher still has the right to put out more stories if they have to, and they're every once in a while they still do a new cycle, usually 3 albums. So yeah, the thing, Europe is a country that, even with all the political turmoil that is part of our history as a continent, we like the idea of barbarian, unconquered, untamed lands, which is something that we don't have anymore in our own backyard.
Right.
And even today, we still see the United States as cowboy land, as a place where law and order don't exist. And even something like a cop show focuses a lot on the amount of violence and crime that you have in a cop show. Makes us think that this is daily life in the United States and everybody's getting shot every day.
Speaking of that, have you heard of the TV show? This will go back, called Dallas.
Oh yeah, it was big. It was a big one here. My mom loved it.
I imagine. I think a lot of our mothers watched that show. Now, I'm not trying to necessarily throw stones at it, but as an American, and I realize we are exporting a lot of our media to the rest of the world, I realize that, oh my goodness, all these people from other lands are watching like this show Dallas. These are my thoughts back in the old days, and they think that we are all like that. We're all rich oil industry guys that are sleeping with everybody's wife and causing all kinds of trouble and greedy. And it's like that we used to have a nice reputation of being this great Christian land. Everybody, respects everybody, and the Lone Ranger would show up if there was a trouble. But now they're exporting, and of course the shows go far beyond Dallas. But that was my barometer back then. I must ask you, what do you all think of the average American? I mean, I know you probably know enough of us that you have a very good indicator, but trust me, we're not all crazy tycoons that are, stealing each other's wives and carousing and so.
Yeah, the thing I find most uncommon actually has nothing to do with people's behaviors, but the way you set up your cities with the urban sprawl. Usually low houses, very few buildings, because we see New York, and sometimes we get the impression that the United States is a country of tall skyscrapers, but most cities, even with populations above 100,000, which would be considered a fairly large city in any European country, a city with a population of under 500,000 has very few tall buildings, and they're mostly located down in the downtown area. Then you have the urban sprawl because you had that much land that you could build on when the Industrial Revolution began. And we couldn't because our borders were already existed for centuries. The cities that existed for centuries, sometimes for millennia. We can locate ruins of Roman settlements, pre-Roman settlements. So, and we had medieval castles which were designed to protect the population. So we are used to living in tight, confined urban areas. So that's that I was most surprised about when I went to Indianapolis. It's state capital, population 800,000, and I was looking out the plane window, and they don't have any buildings here. Why do they make it so hard to get anywhere? Especially because you also have a reputation for having the worst possible public transportation system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't, as nice as we can be, sometimes we don't like our fellow public. And why would we want to ride something with them? So let's just get our own transport, or we'd get our own horse back in the day, and we'd go clopping through the countryside. But no, we don't. We like to spread out. We like elbow room. And so you got places like New York, I think they have a cramped area, so they build straight up, but we just, we spread out. So I don't have an upstairs. I have an attic, but that's just I think more average American spreads out. So the place you live in, it might be what we call wall-to-wall people, but and it's probably not that bad, but somebody like me, and I like a lot of property, and I like to walk around barefoot if I can, but you may not have that. Well, anyway, this has been the social, political, economic hour on the Graphic Man Show. We better get back to some books.
Okay.
What else would you like to show us? I'll put you back on screen.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what I can find here. The good thing is, I missed out having grown up being a child of the 80s and a teen of the 90s. I still missed out on a lot of things that came out in the United States, which were kind of cult hits, but the majority of the public is not aware of. And I'm glad that these things are being preserved for new generations, even though sometimes the books look kind of expensive for a walk-in reader. $40 cover price is probably not very enticing to buy, but these are not prose books. They're not mass market paperbacks. They use a lot of paper and a lot of ink, and there's also the artwork, which takes time to do. So when you reprint something like The Rocketeer, I'd say that $40 is a fair price. The first Rocketeer graphic novel was published in Brazil, and I have it was one of the graphic novels that came to Portugal, and they call it the graphic novel series, but those were magazines. They had staples. They weren't actual books. The thing, because their comics were smaller, if you print it all the comics that they did in American format was called deluxe format. That included the graphic novel series. And I have the Rocketeer, and I only found out later that the Rocketeer was published haphazardly, spread out over several anthologies or as backup in other people's titles. So having the entire story collected in one volume is very important. Otherwise, you have the thrill of the hunt, but sometimes you're going to have trouble locating that one specific set of 10 pages that's in some magazine that you don't know about. And you want to read this story. So having it here, especially when this was shot from the original black and white art, this is from the second graphic novel, the second Rocketeer graphic novel. And yeah, this is a very good. Okay, I think I blinked here.
Yeah, you're fine. It did freeze for a second.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And this one's here from the first graphic. The first graphic novel is actually more fun to read than the second. So it's got all these cool elements.
Okay.
In the story, there's Betty Page, so the Rocketeer's girlfriend. So yeah, I'm glad that they do stuff like this, or something that when it came out, I actually managed to grab a copy of the Marvel graphic novel, but here I have the complete set of Star Slammer stories by Walt Simonson. I am a big fan of Walt Simonson. Even since when he did his first Thor run, his art was completely drowned by Tony DeZuniga's inking style. But this year, where he can just let loose with his Kirby Beyond Kirby style, coming up with his own version of what I call dream machines, body armor that looks both medieval and futuristic at the same time, and it's just an exciting story all around with their psychic powers, and there's still also them being intergalactic hunters. This is very good, and as much as I love Thor, it's when Simonson is working on his own stuff is when he can fully shine. So it's this Star Slammers and his Ragnarok book. They're very, very good, and he can do whatever he wants. Like this here. I don't think he could have done this page layout. This is very, very influenced by European storytelling, using what would normally be a 9-page grid, but each panel is not its own. It's part of a larger scene, and you can focus on details in a way that you normally wouldn't be able to. Also got the miniseries that was published later, and even is original Star Slammers comics, which he put out in the university newspaper, and he did a college thesis on. Even in the first page, it was Space Slammers, and it's a lot more humorous. Even as you're reading it, it morphs into something else, and in the theater, it's definitely more true science fiction. This is in the beginning of his career. You can see him grow as an artist from page to page. So yeah, this is something that becomes lost if it's only about us older readers remembering it and going after a copy and then trading it amongst ourselves. It stops being a part of the collective imaginary of comic book readers. And no matter how sometimes we like to talk about stuff that happened before we were born, and we want to read Golden Age stories, and we want to read EC comics, and we want to go back to the original Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and the Golden Age Flash, and the Silver Age Flash and Silver Age Green Lantern, the beginnings of the DCU. In the end, we kind of go back to the things that we remember reading when we were growing up, and if this stuff is not kept in print for new generations, that it's just going to become forgotten. And I think it's a tragedy because it deserves to be remembered. We like cataloging all of this, and sometimes it just becomes lost because to newer stuff that is not of the same quality.
Well, Paulo, I go back further.
Mm-hmm.
I like the whole Dick Tracy run from 1930 run till about the Moon Maiden, the character in the 1960s. I thought Chester Gould kind of lost his mind at that point, and although fellow Dick Tracy fans will get mad at you if you say that, but later they end up killing off the Moon Maiden and all the Moon people idea, and Dick Tracy goes back to just crime fighting. But not every idea you have is going to be a great idea, and I think the Moon stuff got a little crazy. But 1930s detective stories are right up my alley. Speaking of the 30s, I don't know if are you very familiar with Terry and the Pirates?
Yeah, I know about it. I've never actually read it, but yes, I'm very much familiar with the title and kind of have an idea what it's about.
Well, it was started by Milton Caniff, and he would later leave this strip. He got offered, I guess, a good paycheck to join another newspaper, and he started what we call Steve Canyon. But the artwork is phenomenal, and it's really good. Most of the settings are in China or the Far East, places like that. Um, but I like the older type stuff. Uh, Sometimes they produce giants.
Hmm.
So, but now you're probably not going to be able to produce some of the depictions of the Far East because of a modern. But I and you got the Phantom over there in Europe. I wish I had more Phantom things, but I love all the old newspaper strips. To me, that's the original comic books were reprinted newspaper strips.
Yeah, we like I showed last week. We had a lot of those, and it was the best way to fill up those magazines. Not because ultimately, though, those publishers they didn't care about comics. It was just a cheap way of moving paper,
Right.
and hey, that's what motivated all the DC and Marvel founders as well. They didn't really care about comics. It was a cheap way of moving paper. They had started with the pulps and the skin magazines, and they moved to comics. So it didn't really matter what was on it. One of these days, I'm going to be sued by somebody's descendants because I keep referring to Donenfeld and Goodman as mobsters. But they were running a racket. There's a website that keeps all the transcripts. The investigation on comics in the 1950s, the federal investigation.
Okay.
And I was mostly focusing on the Marvel transcript. He talked to Monroe Freilich Jr., who was Martin Goodman's number 2. He was in charge of day-to-day operations at the umbrella of publishing companies that were collectively known as Atlas. Although there was one Atlas magazine company, but it only had 1 or 2 titles. Then Goodman had 50 or 50 titles active at one given time, and they were pretty much of them different companies for experts. But yeah, in the first 10 minutes or so of the questioning, yeah, they're talking about content and if the stories are appropriate for children. I suppose that's at the time when analysts were still in the room and they were taking notes because this was what the moral panic was about. But after a while, and they spent the rest of the questioning, like almost an hour, just going over business setup, how they do distribution, associated sales. If you were forced to buy some magazines, the ones that were supposedly against ruining the moral fiber of the nation. If the retailers were forced to buy those if they wanted to get TV Guide or Good Housekeeping or whatever. So yeah, that's what they actually cared about. The supposed association with a sort of organized crime where they were running a way of laundering money, which initially it was because the original pulps, the paper was made with the wood, the timber that was used to disguise the moving of moonshine from the countryside to the big cities across the Great Lakes. What are you doing? Oh, it's just timber that we're moving. Are you sure you're not running alcohol? No, it's timber. See, timber. What are you going to do with it? Oh, we're going to do paper with it. So, okay, now we got the paper, we got to fill it up, then we got to transport it. What are we also going to transport? Bottles of moonshine. Here we go. What are you transporting? Magazines. See? Magazines. Not moonshine? No.
And all of what you just described is fascinating to us four-color fossils. We'd love to watch a scene about distribution and numbers and publishing. That might bore the average person, but I want to know, how many did they produce? Where did they distribute? I'd like to know. And were there some places you couldn't get into because other territories? And so, yeah, it is a mob racket.
Yeah. I think that the author who wrote more on it was Gerard Jones, currently in jail for having pictures of children without clothes in his computer. But the comic book writer Gerard Jones also wrote the book Man of Tomorrow, Geeks, Gangsters, and the Birth of the Comic Book, and that's where he goes into more detail on how the operation worked. I think Stephen Grant, when he used to have his column in Comic Book Resources, when it was a site about comic books, he said he'd also like to explore that time and write about it, but I think he never got around to it.
There's always some character in this industry. Let me ask you, do you come across anything like Scalp Hunter?
I don't remember seeing Scalp Hunter. There might be Brazilian comics in the 70s with it. There were in our westerns we didn't have Scalp Hunter. I'm not sure. There might have been some Jonah X stories published around the late 70s, maybe some Batlash, but I'd have to look for those. There were a couple of publishers who had access to American content, DC, Charlton. There was a publisher called Polyrex. They had a comic called Escaravelho Azul, Blue Beetle, which had the logo like that one with the rooster that I showed you. Okay. It was a blue beetle on the side, and then they would switch characters. And because the collection was called Blue Beetle, the Blue Beetle was called Black Beetle on the cover. Captain Atom had a comic. Peacemaker was called Captain Peace. There were in a few war stories from Charlton titles. There's also they had the rights to Beetle Bailey at the time. There's a Mandrake and a couple of Phantoms in that collection, and they even got their hands on Thunder Agents. I don't know how, but they published Thunder Agents among the Charlton stories.
The reason I showed you Scalp Hunter, I realized that sometimes they're fascinated with the old Wild West cowboy. I didn't know if they were also fascinated with Crazy Horse, Cochise, Geronimo, some of the Sitting Bull. Are those names that are familiar over where you are?
Yeah, Davy Crockett in particular was used a lot over here. Billy the Kid, I think a few others from that time. Definitely, they appeared in stories because they were real people. They could be used in stories, not in Oakley, but even the Lucky Luke comic, which is a very famous European comic series. I think I mentioned when we had the Asterix stream because it was written by Goscinny for many years, and Billy the Kid shows up. Judge Roy Bean shows up. Calamity Jane shows up.
Okay.
I have a comic. It wasn't my favorite strip, but I have a comic here with Lucky Luke's take on the OK Corral when Lucky Luke becomes involved in the feud between I forgot the name.
Well, you had Doc Holliday.
Yeah, Doc Holliday and
well, now the names are escaping.
White Earp, basically Lucky Luke becomes enmeshed in the fight between the feud between the Earps and the Clantons.
I think even Star Trek did that. The original series did a version of that.
Yeah, and yeah. DeForest Kelly was in one of the Wyatt Earp movies. He played one of Wyatt Earp's brothers.
He shows up all the time before Star Trek. He is great.
Mm-hmm.
Where I live, this was Wild Bill Hickok's territory.
Mm.
And if I could pick this computer up and if I wouldn't lose connection, I could take you to the spot where he killed a man because he was wearing his watch. And anyway, just some characters out here. So,
Wild Bill had the Wild West show, or was it?
No, that's Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill, yeah.
Yeah.
But they knew each other, I think. Might have been. Sometimes I have this notion of thinking of all of these characters as contemporaries, but most of them had only a brief career, let's call it, and they had their own territories. Right. But we like the idea of universes. So sometimes we like Lucky Luke. He meets all of them. Meets all of these characters. So yeah, but Buffalo Bill's Wild West show is kind of what helped create the idea of the Wild West in popular culture, and when it reached the eastern seaboard of North America, that's how it got exported into Europe, and so it created our vision of how the Wild West existed, which is of course not entirely true, but for many years that was how we viewed America, the land of cowboys fighting Indians.
Well, and there was some truth to some of that. Mm-hmm. I mean, Annie Oakley joined the Wild West shows, and she was a tremendous shot. I mean, shooting the rifle backwards, looking at a mirror and hitting it's just, I can't do that. But yeah, stuff like that fascinates me. So show us some more if you got it.
Yeah. More preservation in a way that this is a good way to preserve the stories. Batman Tales of the Demon, which is the run, which is not exactly a run. All of the stories featuring Ra's al Ghul, made by Danny O'Neill and Neil Adams. And while he was not appearing every month, of course, there's a certain tight continuity between all of his appearances, and they don't spend much time going over what they were doing in the in between stories, and it's all about Batman and probably his most intelligent enemy. Like the first time he meets Ra's al Ghul, they kind of use this in the Dark Knight movie, because Ra's al Ghul meets, but the Bruce Wayne is introduced to someone that claims to be Ra's al Ghul, but it isn't, and just the same, the character he's wearing a mask is not the real Ra's al Ghul, and it's only later that he meets up with him, and he reveals that he wanted to see if the Batman was worthy of marrying his daughter Talia, and that's a running theme through all of these stories. Always, Ra's al Ghul comes back. Talia is torn between having to obey her father and her love for his greatest opponent, who is also the man that was selected as a heir by his own enemy. You have to. It's great drama. My greatest enemy is my chosen heir, right. And they handle it very, very well here. Also, this is it's here that I think it was here that in this set of stories that we were introduced to Matches Malone, Bruce Wayne's alter ego when he wants to move around the criminal underworld. And yeah, we used a lot of other characters around here. There's Batwoman, there's Bronze Tiger, and putting these back, keeping this in print, it's the best way of reading Ra's al Ghul in its true purest form, as conceived by his original creators.
Oh, I agree. I'd like the first 40 or 50 years of Batman to always be in print.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a bit of history with this trade paperback, Avengers Kree-Skrull War. And when I started reading in English, DC was building up a good reprint collection of paperback and hardcover editions, helped of course by Vertigo's success, but they were expanding it to DC Universe titles, and even that Tales of the Demon. Yeah, Kree Skrull War.
So these are just like comic floppy versions of what you're showing. But go ahead.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have the entire storyline because they missed the first 4 issues, which are available here. So this is a 200-page collection. They should have done the whole storyline in 3. They could have done 3 special editions instead of 2. They would have the whole storyline. But Marvel's policy on reprinting storylines made absolutely no sense. It was very haphazard. They already had essentials, but they were mostly confined to Spider-Man and X-Men because they were the popular titles during the 90s. And one day, Marvel announces that they're putting out a new X-Men trade paperback. And it's called X-Men Road Tripping. And it's the best road trips starring the X-Men and their supporting cast. And we were in the news groups, and people were complaining, why the hell are they putting this out when there are a bunch of comics that have great storylines that have never been reprinted, that need to be accessed by new fans? And we were talking about this in 1998, 1999. And one of the names that kept popping up as something that should be reprinted was the Kree Skrull War. So when they finally announced, and we're gonna reprint this, and everybody was ecstatic because this is it's not the first epic story starring the Avengers. That would be Avengers number 23-24, when the Avengers have to ally themselves with Kang because he's being betrayed by his lieutenant who takes over his army, and in the end, Ravonna dies. So that's the first time that we have the sense of a great epic that goes beyond the borders of Earth and across space and time, and make sure that we perceive the Avengers as the greatest fighting machine on Earth, even if it was still with Cap's Cookie Quartet, probably the most underpowered lineup in Avengers history. And here we have the big 3 coming back. We have all the good characters involved: the Vision, Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye become as Goliath at the time. Captain Marvel shows up. You have all of the Kree and Skrull typical supervillains: the Super Skrull, Ronan the Accuser, the Supreme Intelligence, and it's an epic scope because even though the Earth is only important to the story in the same way that Pacific Islands were important to World War II, as a beachhead into a bigger prize, in the end, it's Earth who solves this million years old conflict between the Kree and the Skrull, and it interrupts their war when they go to Kree and to Kreelar, to planet Hala, and defeat the Kree Supreme Intelligence thanks to Rick Jones's powers, and it was an amazing story that pulls you in page after page. There are moments in between that while not advancing the story are great character moments, like this famous 2-page spread drawn by Neil Adams of Henry Pym becoming Ant-Man again, and the Vision you can say deactivated, but he's supposed to be a living machine. So is he dormant? Is he in a coma? Is he dead? Can he be brought back to life? And he goes inside a synthetic man, and he gets attacked by synthetic white blood cells, we can call them. So these are great visuals.
Definitely.
And yeah, even though Neil Adams didn't draw everything, there's Sal Buscema art in here. This is great all around, and this in the final moments where Rick Jones is talking shit to the Kree Supreme Intelligence. as only a young man from Mid America, from Middle America, can say to what is essentially the emperor of a galaxy spanning civilization. And here you are saying, "Who the hell are you to kidnap me and demand things from me?"
Do you remember the galactic storm?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so at the ending of that, Captain America is wanting to vote for letting the Kree leader survive,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the other heroes want to kill it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I probably would have voted with the other guys. As much as I love Captain America, I don't see how you're going to handcuff that guy.
Mm-hmm.
But oh well.
It was a good storyline, even though here everything is contained in the Avengers title. There are a couple of plot threads from the Inhuman series and Amazing Adventures that kind of get mixed up in here, but it's you don't need to read those to understand the story. And Galactic Storm went across all the Avengers titles at the time. In fact, some of them, Quasar and Wonder Man, they weren't being used by the Brazilian publisher. So normally we wouldn't be reading those stories, but because they were part of the crossover, they had to be included. In the end, it ran across over 6 months of the regular Captain America title. All of because the Captain America title at the time, they could have two or three Captain America stories in the same comic, but it didn't matter because the next month they would go to Avengers comics, and they could do 2 or 3 in the same way. As long as Captain America appeared in the Avengers, it was still the Captain America book.
Yeah, I remember not liking it because you mean I have to buy Quasar, I have to buy Wonder Man. I mean they're fine.
Yeah,
but I only had so many dollars to go around. So
yeah, and the if it wasn't for the way that the Brazilians published things, I would never have read them like that. And it would be impossible. Some of those comics were Wonder Man was not distributed in newsstands, I believe. So they wouldn't have been published here. And if they were, even the Brazilians didn't have the market to have so many titles. That's why Rom was a backup. Rom, everybody loves Rom, but Rom was a backup in the Incredible Hulk, and then in X-Men. And if it hadn't been its own independent title, it would never have survived that long. It needs to be in the anthology format. Was good as a way to keep up with the Marvel universe. So that's how you end up with foreigners knowing more about the Marvel universe than Americans, because we got to read more comics in a more affordable way than you did.
Right. So you've probably seen where I've held up their magazine size, a Hulk books from England. You've seen those?
Yeah.
So the interiors are black and white. Were your interiors black and white as well?
No, the Brazilians colored them. In the 60s and 70s, they had a lot of black and white magazines. Ebal were the biggest publishers until the 70s. They colored their comics. RGE colored their comics. By the time Editora Abril, which was the most important publisher in the modern history of comics in Brazil, because they also did Disney. They had the rights to a bunch of Brazilian pop figures. They did comics with them. They put out about 50 comics a month, but only about half of those were superheroes. So even that was a crowded market. But they were colored, and they for Marvel and DC, they had a person in charge who was very knowledgeable about what was going on in the United States, which was not easy in 1979. But they managed to make sure that the chronology worked, and that they put out quality work, that they selected the best stories without missing stuff that was important to tell the ongoing story, and to keep as many characters possible inside one comic to make sure that everybody understood what was going on.
What you just said was very key, because it's nice to have somebody in charge that knows what's going on, is familiar with the characters. So many times someone gets put in charge, and the only reason they have that job is their dad owns the company or something.
No, but this guy wasn't. He had to convince. He and a friend who had editorial experience. The guy who knew all the continuity. So they got together. One guy had editorial experience. The other knew the continuity and how the stories were supposed to be published. And he's actually a dentist. He was going to he was going to medical school at the time. So his parents didn't like the idea. We're paying for you to go to college to be a dentist, and what are you doing working on those funny books? but they managed to convince the publisher that it was worth start getting the rights to the superheroes. They wanted the rights to the superheroes, especially because Ebal was they were going out of business, so the DC weren't available yet, but a lot of Marvels were. They didn't have Spider-Man and the Hulk in the beginning, so they started with Captain America, Iron Man. They managed to put out Luke Cage and Miss Marvel stories. And at first, they were some stories were they were in 79. And let's start some stories in 68, some in 73, some in 75. But we can make sure that this builds up in a way. And it wasn't until 1988 that they finally aligned all the titles with right after Secret Wars 2 was done. So it took a while, almost a decade, but it worked. And sometimes they had to do some weird things like erasing Monica Rambeau from a Hulk story where the Avengers were guest stars because they hadn't introduced the new Captain Marvel yet. They did, they did the same with Secret Wars because Secret Wars was associated with the toy line. And they advanced the chronology on the Secret Wars to put it out at the same time that the toy line was in the stores, and because of that, they had to change a lot of things. If Captain Marvel was in a scene, she was erased.
I tell you what,
they had to explain that what was wrong with Storm because she showed up in her punk outfit and said, "Oh no, that it was the Beyonder's fault. He changed her on purpose."
Wow. I tell you what, if you ever come across one of those panels again where they've erased Monica, send me the graphic, and I'll try to do a side by side with the American.
I think I can find scans, which it's probably the best way. I think that they used to be on blogs a few years ago. I'll see if they're still there. I haven't seen them in a while.
I realized that. Are you familiar with Don Rosa?
Yeah.
Okay. When he was drawing, go ahead.
I don't have it here. Let me go pick it up. Give me 1 minute.
Let's get caught up on the chat here. All right, Eric. We'll see you later. For those of you tuning in, we'll have our regular Wednesday night broadcast. It will be Outer Space Comics, and I'll be joined by a lot of four-color fossils then. And so we hope to see you then on Wednesday nights.
Portuguese edition, The Laughing Times of Scrooge McDuck.
So you probably know where I'm ready to talk about because, the Wild Wild West, everybody's shooting everybody back, but in some of the European markets, they erased the gun out of some of the bad guys' hands. So you have scenes where somebody's just pointing their finger at Scrooge instead of a gun. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't seen him, but I'm not surprised. Might have happened in Germany or France. At first we got access to Disney through the Brazilians, and then when they opened up an office in Lisbon, mostly dedicated to first importing, but then the Disney comics started being printed here in 1983. Still with the Brazilian Brazilian grammatical standard. Until 1987, when we finally started using our own grammatical standard for Portuguese, but we used the.
Let me interrupt you. So, when was your first knowledge of Donald and Mickey? Are you saying 1983 was when you guys first?
They started in 83. So my first contact with Disney Comics was probably around 1984, right before I turned 5.
And there would have been no way for you to know about them.
There's merchandising. There was Disney Club on TV. We were kind of aware of the movies, although they didn't show up much on TV. So yeah, it's the first characters that we kind of learned of. We kind of learned of was Mickey and Donald and Uncle Scrooge. You know that Uncle Scrooge is very, very popular in Europe, probably more so than Donald.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I'm a Donald fan, and I always thought that Scrooge is great, but he overshadows him. And I always, bless his heart, I feel sorry for this fictional character, Donald Duck, that he's kind of like just this guy standing around for all the Scrooge stories. But
do you remember the green parrot in the Three Caballeros?
Yes.
Yeah, José Carioca. So at first, the Brazilians started printing stories made in America with the character, and the American authors had no idea what Brazil was like. They were influenced by a lot of Brazilian expats who were middle class or above, but they were artists, and they kind of exiled themselves in the United States and show the United States, the American audience, what bossa nova was.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's how we end up with the girl from Ipanema.
Yeah.
But the stories were a bit reflective of that. Also, I'm kind of mixing in a little of what Cuban expats who were rich during the pre-Castro days with Fulgencio Batista and the Brazilians. Man, this is not Brazil. We have our own artists. We can start doing our own comics. So they did. There are more José Carioca stories made in Brazil than anywhere else. We read them in Portugal, and it was real. The guy lived in a. They got rid of the straw hat and the umbrella. The umbrella is not necessarily bad because it rains a lot in São Paulo. But since it's Carioca, it's from Rio de Janeiro, so it doesn't rain the same way. And now he had slacks and the sleeveless shirt because it's hot. You're not supposed to wear a suit. And now he was poorer, and he played soccer. He had friends, and they went out for beers. And it was much more. And he was hard up for money, but he was looking for a scam that worked for him instead of working hard. So more the Brazilian experience of what a folk hero would be.
I must confess, I never cared for the story, the Three Caballeros, because I was just always wanting Donald. And here you had other characters that were taken away from Donald's presence, so to speak. But that's all we ever saw of these other characters. Disney didn't, or American didn't keep going with them. So I'm sure it did great for other places, but here in America, we just didn't care. So
and it's like we have characters in Europe that either didn't appear in more than a few stories made in America, like Scrooge's major opponent in American comics was Flintheart Glomgold.
Glomgold, yeah.
But in European comics, is John Rockerduck.
John Rockerduck makes one appearance in a Carl Barks story here in America, but I think that's all that I'm aware of. So.
Yeah, but Rockerduck appeared all the time in comics made in Italy and France.
I hear Moby. There's a character called Moby Duck. He's popular elsewhere, but not so much here. Yeah. Even though Gold Key produced about a few of those, I have one. Yeah. No, I just don't care. But
there's a lot of mileage taken out of the relationship between Donald and his cousin Fedri. Now, Fedri did appear in American Story first, but most of his stories are made by the Scandinavian studio, so he's more popular there. But the Brazilians kind of liked him because they gave him a superhero identity, the Red Bat, and he lives in a trash can like his Oscar the Grouch. Okay. But he has everything in the trash can, including the bat phone to get the commissioner's phone calls. He has it inside the trash can, and he calls him, "Oh, Commissioner, yes. Oh, you mean so and so is on the loose? I'm on my way." And
so little Batman, yeah. Nice elements. I think it's all fascinating, but Moby just wasn't done over here. Fethry, I'm aware of. Oh, by the way, the greatest thing that probably happened to us American Disney fans was a company called Gladstone. And for like one reason, not only did they pick up where Gold Key had faded in Western publishing, but they started producing who drew this comic, who
Hmm.
wrote this one, and that is something that was withheld from us for years, unless you lived in California and you bumped into Carl Barks. Did you even know who he was?
Hmm.
But if it wasn't for Gladstone, we wouldn't know all this. And then another company called Another Rainbow, I believe. Uh, I'm probably getting that wrong, but they produced all these albums. And then we started getting introduced to, I'm going to pronounce it wrong. I'm sorry, Romana Scarpa.
Romano Scarpa, yeah.
Okay, so good. It's good to have you here to help me out with that. And something called Vicar.
Hmm.
And from what I hear, Vicar is this code name for a group of artists in Europe that kind of share that title. Am I correct?
And not familiar with the car. I know the names of some of of the most famous Italian artists. They're always they always want to keep that work in print. The thing about Disney Comics is that uh, even though they're producing new material, there's so much good material out there that when the kids grow out of reading Disney, they can bring back. So they make sure that there are a lot of stories from the 60s through the 80s. They're still available for new readers. And even though the style got to a point where it's not quite as recognizable as.
Thank you for addressing that. When I see there's new modern Disney out there, to me, I mean, all the characters look like they should be on skateboards, and it's a little too hip and a little too
Yeah,
stylized. I prefer
yeah.
Rosa, Barks, even Vic Lockman. Some of
Mhm.
the more, but I'm an old fossil, so what do you expect? So,
Yeah, I noticed that in the mid '90s. I wasn't reading Disney as much back then, but a few new stories, especially the long form stories, started to appear, and the the characters they had a lot of movement that was probably inspired by anime, uh, and it wasn't bad, but it was not the same thing, and the colors became very garish.
oh, okay. Um, you said you might show something for Captain Strangeliffe because he was asking
Mhm.
in
It
the.
was he asked about what superheroes we had, and we don't really have superheroes. Although the French had attempts at doing their own superheroes, especially the publisher called Lug. The name is based on the name Lugdunum, which was the Roman name of the city of Lyon in France.
Yeah, I remember that from Asterix.
Yeah.
I,
and Lyon was where a bunch of smaller publishers were holed up, and they were the biggest targets of the French comics code, which, unlike the American Comics Code was actually run by the government, or better, run officially by the government, but actually by the Catholic Church.
okay.
And they didn't. And given this was the time when the French were very resistant to outside cultural influences, especially the Americanization of pop culture. In regards to comics, there was a law passed in 1949 that addressed youth publications, and there was a code of conduct that all publishers had to live by, or they would be fined, and the publisher could face arrest. And many of those publishers from Lyon were always being harassed by this Comics Code Authority, especially because they were publishing imported material in black and white, smaller format. Some stories came from Italy, some came from the United States.
So let me
And,
guess. The two main rules I'm guessing you two main rules are everything has to be very French sounding. No no crazy British words or like email or something. And the second one was don't make fun of Catholics. Or those, am I wrong?
No, it was mostly focused on behavior because there was that perception that Americans were gun-toting gangsters who solved all their problems with their fists, and also that they were sleeping with everyone's wives.
Yeah. Okay.
So you
to
could have
Dallas.
none of that in European publications.
Okay.
Which is why Tintin didn't have a girlfriend.
That'd be a distraction. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you import comics from abroad, you have no way of knowing what's in there. It's full of smut, especially those Americans.
Definitely. Well, I mean, there's Daisy Duck. You never know. So
and they hated science fiction. So yeah, they canceled the magazine where the Fantastic Four and the Silver Surfer appeared because they said it was too scary. It was called Fantasque. It became, even though it only had 7 issues, it became a cause célèbre for not First Amendment rights, but for creators' rights and for free speech in youth publications. So there's even a comic book store. It's not a comic shop; it's a comic bookstore. A bookstore specialized in comics called Fantasque, which opened in France, which took the name precisely from that comic. But because that, if they didn't know if they were going to have access to the American superheroes every time. Lug was the first to publish Marvel superheroes in France in 1968.
So if the Silver Surfer was a little too much risky or scary, I guess they wouldn't be able to handle EC or some of the old Atlas books.
Yeah, EC they didn't like. The DC books were easier to pass the code. There was a magazine from another publisher called Étrange Aventure, Strange Adventures. Of course, by the time they got to the 60s, Strange Adventures was mixing DC material with Charlton and post Atlas implosion pre-superhero Marvel work. And by the end, they were just running the Marvel monsters.
So here in America, we have a title in DC called Strange Adventures. Mm-hmm. You're saying that your title, Strange Adventures, could produce from different companies, not just DC.
At first they used material from all of the DC's science fiction titles, and they used the Strange Adventures title because all of the DC science fiction titles they were pretty much interchangeable unless they had ongoing features.
I find that's interesting because if I were a Strange Adventures collector, and I have a few of those, but I don't have them all. Goes back to, I think, to 1952, I believe. But if you thought, oh, there, I've got the whole run of Strange Adventures, I can finally just kick back and relax just to find out that there's all these other versions of Strange Adventures. Yeah,
they didn't have Mystery in Space. But they put out Mystery in Space stories in their own version of Strange Adventures. The magazine was bigger. It was 68 pages. So So, but by the end, they started putting out more, Marvel stuff in there. Also, Arredi Ultima had the rights to Captain America, which Lug didn't. So they put out some Marvel material themselves. But Lug were the first ones to put out Marvel, and they had this artist called Jean Frisano, who did beautiful painted covers. At first they were recreations of the Marvel Kirby covers, but then they started doing covers that described the interior of the comic, but they were produced whole cloth from scratch. But there was one rule: each comic needed something to be made in France, and that's why they got the French-made covers.
Wow.
But Frisano was a very good artist, and there was an exhibit in the Angoulême Comics Festival a couple of years ago where they showed off his work, which is good because the Angoulême people are snobs and they don't like those small comics from Lyon. But Frisano has such great work that they're now aware of that the Americans produce good stuff, so they're more open to doing stuff like this.
Can you say his name a couple of times? I want my viewers to get a handle of it.
Frisano, Frisano. Since it's southern France, he probably has some Italian great grandparent down the line. You have a lot of people in southern France with Italian surnames, but they pronounce it French, so it's not Frisano, it's Frisano.
Frisano.
Yeah,
Am I okay? Frisano.
yeah, it's good enough.
All right. I'm
Yeah,
wanting.
because the stressed syllable is the same. Italians pronounce it Frisano, and French pronounce it Frisano. So it's the last syllable that's stressed.
Okay.
You should see them pronounce every English and American name. I was listening to Formula One broadcast, and everyone has the stressed syllable in the last name in French.
Well, I'd like some of these names to get more American. Only 150 people are going to watch this, but was he good at mimicking the style of? Did you say Kirby? He was redoing Kirby.
Yeah,
covers?
he did Kirby. He did Kirby. He was very good at doing Starlin.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, even I'd say that he and Bob Layton had similar layouts, even though he was doing it before Bob Layton became well known.
Wow. I don't know how. What are the odds of me stumbling upon one of these? But I definitely will be on the lookout.
Yeah, you got to look up with the foreign comics people. There's an Instagram account called Define999. Define999. That's Matt, and Matt is one of the co-owners of the Foreign Comics Calling podcast and the Foreign Comics Calling Facebook group. And those guys are they're looking for foreign editions of Marvel and DC mostly, also a few Spawn, and the majority of collectors, they focus on doing cover collections, identical versions of the same cover that were published in other countries. But they also like original art, especially when it's Turkish or Indonesian. So it's mostly Marvel and DC, also a few horror books. Matt is a very big fan of the Brazilian horror magazines. He actually knows this Portuguese artist who immigrated to Brazil. He became a part of the Brazilian comics industry at age 21 after moving there. His name is Jaime Cortez, and he was he did his own stories, but he's mostly known for his covers of horror magazines.
Wow. And speaking of horror magazines, that was one of the questions
Yeah.
Strange Life was asking you.
Yeah, he said that one of those horror magazines from Brazil that he probably has was called Crypta. Crypta used material mostly from Warren. So yeah, that lasted for a very long while. There were others. I'm not as familiar because horror was never a genre that interested me much. But I'm familiar with Crypta, and I know that they lasted for a long time. And we didn't have many of those. Horror was definitely not popular when we were a dictatorship, and after that, kind of never gained that much popularity either. We did have a comic called Zacarella, which was sort of our own Portuguese imitation of Vampirella, and of Vampirella and of Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And it lasted for a couple of years. There was an attempt at bringing her back and didn't quite succeed. But I don't have any of those. What I do have, are some fairly recent attempts at doing adventure stories in Portugal. First, I want to show those French superheroes, because they tried to bring back the Luke characters under the Samick banner when the Scandinavian group Samick bought Luke, and Jean-Marc Officier was involved in it, and they did the series called The Strangers, where they got all the characters in one group, and they had to turn most of them into superheroes. So this is Omicron, and it's sort of a take on the Green Lantern or the Lensman. And let's see if I can show a better picture of this guy. Omicron is here with Starlock. He was given a superhero costume a few months before the Samick takeover, but back in the 70s, he was more of a Doc Savage type character. In fact, this publisher had two Doc Savage characters, both Starlock here and Jeff Sullivan. But Jeff Sullivan was a proper Doc Savage imitation, and Starlock was an alien from outer space. He's super strong. And Omicron, being a take on the Green Lantern, also was merged with an alien consciousness.
So originally they were just standing around with casual clothing, and then now they've been costumed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is the guy that brings the group back. He was what the French called a Tarzanide, a Tarzan clone. His name is Tanka. It's this guy here. The woman is called Futura, and she was a new character. She was named after one of their 70s magazines that featured their own characters. They even have their own version of S.H.I.E.L.D. called Clash, which have their own space station. So
does the word Clash stand for something like S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Yeah, I think so, but I can't remember what it is. I was probably on an article around here. These pages are becoming glued. They used to be the Then there are other stories here. This character is called Phoenix. She had a crossover with Witchblade in the United States when the Strangers was published by Image, and she's more of a street level hero. So here she's riding a motorcycle. And there was also this magazine. This was Strangers number 0. So it's a spin-off of Planet Comics number 14. Here's Future on the cover. And this one was, and it even mentions the Semic Verse. They were trying to give it a name. Okay, didn't quite catch on. The story. This has a bunch of shorter stories. So the Bronze Gladiator didn't last for much. It's another one of those aliens who come to Earth. You get a lot of those.
Was she some sort of Red Sonja type? The way she's the lady on the cover.
Futura. No, not quite. She's more of a cosmic force.
Oh, okay.
And this ugly thing here is called Wampus. This comic, the Wampus comic was also canceled by the French Comics Code Authority for being scary. And he is kind of ugly. And there's another thing here that I really have to show. This is the main bad guy of the story, Duke Ozark.
Okay. It kind of looked like Pluto from the Thors Jack Kirby were drawn. Yeah.
They introduce here, they have a bunch of headshots, but they're talking about all the people who are involved with the comic. They have a list here. Starting with Jean-Marc L'Officier up top. L'Officier, of course, being known in North America. François Cortegiani, who I think I have a French comic of his around here. He also worked for Disney in Italy. Better who might be well-known names. The Peru brothers as colorists, they're mentioned here. Olivier and Stéphane Peru. And here they talk about some of the characters who were part of the universe. There's a mention here of something called Kabur, which was their take on Conan. Here's another Phoenix story here. A bit more manga-esque. And the Time Brigade.
Yeah, it does look very like a modern. What year would that be?
These comics, they were published in 2001.
Yeah. Okay.
and the Strangers came out by Image in 2004, 6-issue miniseries. Here's another feature, the Time Brigade. It appeared in short stories, more science fiction-y. And this one I wanted to show because it's the first ever crossover between an American and a European in the continental European character. Wampus versus Nexus. The Mike Barron and Steve Root gave permission. The art is by Jay Stevens. I think he's Canadian, and yeah, and they need up because they're both cosmic entities in their own way. One dedicated to order, and the other to chaos.
Well, that's a little dangerous of being too scary. That one guy there.
Yeah.
According to their own earlier censoring.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to show, what comics do we have in Portugal that might be that I can maybe convince Americans to take a look at. So this is Dragomancer. It's a fantasy comic. First volume came out a few years ago. We're still waiting for the second. Hopefully it won't take long. The writer Philippe Faria also has a couple of novels, and he mostly works as a translator. So yeah, I think this is pretty good. The writer is Philippe Faria, and the artist is called Manuel Morgado. Unfortunately, we have something. Okay, how much does a mainstream comic sell in Portugal? If it's successful, 500 comics. Okay, how much does an alternative comic sell in Portugal? If it's successful, 500 copies. So it doesn't matter if it's for the general audience or not. It's always the same people buying comics.
And would that be weekly or monthly?
No, this is an album, like the European comics. So yeah,
so you're not meaning 500 continuing issues. You mean
no, it's 500 copies sold of the album. It doesn't matter if it's something made for the mainstream or if it's made for an alternative public. If it sells 500 copies, it's good. It's always the same people buying comics. So yes, but these are albums. We no longer have magazines or periodicals with comics on the stands. It's all we got right now. It's what the publishers can do because no big media publishers are involved in making comics anymore. And this is what we have. It's another one I liked. The writer artist is called Ricardo Venancio, and this is Anoram. Is a down on his luck barbarian. The story is not much to speak of, but I think it has a lot of potential, and I hope the second one is right around the corner. There are actually English versions of both this and the previous comic I shown, but they're in Portugal and they're not exporting them. So yeah, they're not going to be that famous.
On the cover, what kind of creature was that chasing him?
Yeah, it's sort of it's kind of a mole rat.
Yeah,
it's a giant mole rat. Let's see if I can show some interior art. The art is definitely better than the story, but I think it has a lot of potential, and this could be an interesting universe to explore. Because if you're doing this type of fantasy where you have a character, a roving accidental hero, you can do some interesting things. This is the character, Hanuram. And yeah, like the other one, we're still waiting for the second album. Here's the mole rat thing. It's actually more like a Yeti.
Yeah, a little different than the cover.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's show. Where's the other thing that I had here? Oh man, I forgot to bring. Thought I took it out. No, it doesn't matter. Okay, and a few years. Oh, wait a minute, maybe it's here. No, it isn't. Dang. Thought I'd taken some other thing out. Okay, is it? Well, a few years ago, my comic shop, the owner of the comic shop I visit, decided to become a publisher and writer, and came up with a character called Super Pig. And yeah, he also gets into adventures, but they're a bit more esoteric.
So, are there any jokes or puns about the word bacon?
Kinda. He not on this book, but on the second one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He's eating bacon for breakfast.
They couldn't resist, huh?
Yeah, and it's got some interesting coloring here. The art is very dynamic. The artist on this is called Carlos Pedro, and Carlos is also working for the American market. He used to draw Elephant Man. Here's some more art. It's pretty good. It was still very young back then, but he already had style. And yeah, the thing is, the character is supposed to be rich and with finesse, and everybody knows and loves him. But then he gets involved in a strange adventure that doesn't look real. There's a joke here only for his Portuguese, which is this character here is a public servant, and the joke is that it's actually the face is from a very well-known singer who with a song where he plays a public servant.
Oh, okay. So you would have to have to know that or be in on
yeah
the humor there.
He was briefly known internationally because he was the Portuguese representative in the Eurovision Song Contest in 1981 or 1982, I believe.
Okay. But if I over here reading it, I wouldn't get that's supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the word super, just how super is he? I mean, is that just...
No, he doesn't have superpowers, but he's super. It's his name. It's actually his real name. They show his identity card and it says Super Pig. There are a few other stories also in the esoteric vein, but it's never a proper adventure book. I forgot to bring the other book that written by another person that Mario also published, and which is called Agent of Chaos. It's a crime detective series featuring the police inspector. It's more realistic, but yeah, I forgot to bring it. And when Dr. Strangelove asked about horror comics, horror is not very popular, but this writer is very well known here in the comics biz as being very much into the occult, and so he came up with some very interesting horror comics, like this one, the Grave of the Parents. It's not the type of thing that the art style is not for people who are used to a more conventional style. So yeah, that's this is what I mean when I said more highbrow, too highbrow to even be published by Fantagraphics.
Okay. Yeah, so over here in America, the Warren mags or the creepy, there would be shading and grays and things like that. So what you were showing is kind of very, very nice sketching instead, if you could allow me to call it that.
Yeah, this is more for the people who like Negative Burn or other alternative comics. So yeah, but the writer is very good, and he's also a novel. Is more of a novelist nowadays. The David Soares, the artist is called André Coelho, and the David he's very good at researching occult stuff, and it shows in his writing. It's very, very complex and very informative. But he also he can keep us riveted. So it's not for superhero fans, but if you don't mind heavy reading, you're going to see that it's very, very easy heavy reading.
So is it truly in the horror genre, or is it some like a distant cousin to horror?
See, this is actual horror, not war and horror. War and horror is more
People
like
getting their
Twilight.
head.
It's Twilight Zone horror. It's
Okay,
it's
okay,
for mainstream appreciation. This is the type of thing that it's mental horror. The even if you don't have gore, it's more like
right.
it's meant to be unsettling.
So
Uh,
I would kind of call it mystery, but
but it has supernatural elements, and that's where the horror comes from.
oh, I see.
Yeah, this is called Musha, and it's illustrated by Osvaldo Medina, which is our greatest artist, who is not well known outside Portugal, and he should be because he's very, very good. He's great at doing body language. Nobody else in Portugal draws body language like he does. And this is a bit kind of a take on David Cronenberg because David is a fan. And the story is set in a Polish village when the Nazis are invading, and a bunch of characters turn into flies. So yeah, it's
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
so,
That looks
so you
pretty
can
good.
so I think this one shows better what I mean by unsettling. So yeah, all of the flies. David explained to why he chose flies to do a comic about flies. And it's more like to him flies are more disgusting than cockroaches because while cockroaches skitter on the floor, they actually are seen to clean themselves up a lot more than flies, because flies are seen as more clean because they fly, and there's the notion of being elevated. But since they eat and lay their eggs on excrement, they're actually more disgusting and more disease-ridden.
I agree. Flies are terrible. And of course, one of the names of the devil, the Lord of the Flies, Beelzebub.
Mm-hmm.
The flies are notorious for being bad. One of our fellow fossils, Meyer Greenblatt, had a real tough time when he was overseas dealing with the flies. Ask him sometime; it'll amaze you what he had to
Yeah.
go through.
And this one was self-published. David knows how to draw, but he prefers writing. So this was written and drawn by him. It's an older comic. It was also self-published, and it's the last great movie theater. And
So these books aren't having to worry about the French comics code.
no. By this time, nobody cares about the French
right.
comics code. It's never been taken out of the books. But after magazines like Metal Hurlant and Fluide Glacial became a thing, especially after the 1968 student movements, there's been they haven't really been following the laws regarding youth publications, unless they were available on supermarkets or things like that for the kids to pick up. And since the more adult albums now go straight to book form, they're not catching the attention of the authorities. When it's a book, you kind of can have more sex and violence in a way that they don't pay as much attention, and the book format gives it credence. So they have more respect for what they're doing.
So of the books you just showed, are they under the same success ratio as if they print 500 of them?
Yeah,
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this one was published. I think this one at 300. 300. Yeah, it's meant to be unsettling, and there's a.
Is the average child in Portugal apt to? When I say child, all the way up to 25, who cares? Are they apt to read that physically in their hand, or is the video screen the predominant?
Yeah, nowadays it's the video screen. When I was a teenager, I probably wouldn't have even looked at this comic because it's not the type of thing that interests me. With a cover like this and looking at the interior art, it doesn't even it's not even a matter of the subject matter being unsettling or not, because I could buy comics by Milo Manara and nobody would bat an eye. And Manara is known for drawing naked women as much as he can. But this one I would have passed by when I was a teenager. And seeing stuff like this, it wouldn't be a matter of wow, this is going to give me nightmares. It would be I can't even understand the art. I had to be older to properly understand this, and this is how I found that what a good writer David is, because we never really had any great writers for the artists to work with. Most of the stuff was, since Portuguese comics have never been really high sellers, they're usually done for fun. Whatever they can sell, they take it. Everybody has real jobs, unless they can start working for foreign markets, like France or Britain or the United States. Even getting our stuff out there in other countries. The book that David Soares did before this one was published in France. It was called Mr. Burroughs. But most of these, they're not. I think a couple of the ones that he published with Mario Freitas at Kingpin Books, I think there are English versions of that. But you had to go to look through the UK section of the previous catalog to find them. So it's very unlikely that they were ordered.
So on your, if you still have the equivalent of a newsstand where you live, what is the percentage of books from Portugal? You mentioned a lot of your South American colleagues.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, right now the only comics you can buy on the newsstand are Brazilian, and they are specifically from Monica's Gang, which is a Brazilian universe created by Mauricio de Souza. They are imported from Brazil. They are published by Panini right now. Panini sometimes, but not always. They can bring over Marvel. They never bring over DC. They can't. Somebody else owns the DC rights for the Iberian Peninsula, and they're not doing anything with it.
Interesting.
But you're never sure if you're going to get all the issues if you're trying to keep up with the title. And they're trying to do more special editions instead of an ongoing series with a complete storyline, or at least if it's a 12-part storyline, they break it up into 2 or 3 and they put it up as magazines. But you get the complete story, so we don't have anthologies as we used to anymore. Nobody is making magazines for the newsstand with comics in Portugal. And the previous Disney license holder went out of business because a distributor went out of business and owed them a lot of money. It affected a lot of smaller publishers who have like knitting magazines and stuff like that. They exist just to have, but yeah, it's somebody who wants to publish a very specific niche magazine. And since they had to go with that distributor because they were willing to handle lower print volumes, lower print runs. When that distributor goes out of business, it takes all the publishers with it. So yeah, they were out of it. One thing that we have in Portugal is that we get these amazing sketches on our books, and this is on the inside of the front cover, and that's me. So yeah, it's a sketch with a dedication.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to, if you're looking for horror in Portugal, you're gonna have to look up. You're gonna have to go after books, and they're not as cheap as magazines, and they might be harder to source after they go out of print, which it takes a couple of years. But the idea is that they need to sell at least 80% of the books in the first 6 months. Otherwise, they're going to be losing money.
When you say printing 500, is that for your country alone, or?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. They have no guarantee that anybody in other countries will ever hear of them, and Like when Mario tried to do books in English, he tried to put them on previous UK, and even that was a long shot because most readers who pre-order stuff, they don't go through through the entire catalog. They just stick with Marvel and DC, and previous is a thick catalog, and it's got a lot of small print about comics that nobody's ever heard of, and most people don't care. I learned how to go through all of that because there were occasions where I would hear about a new comic, and I wanted to make sure that I would be able to buy it. And in order to get a book that is not from one of the four big publishers, I have to go through the catalog, and I have to point it out and place a pre-order. Otherwise, I would never be sure that it was coming.
You mentioned your country was under a dictatorship. When did that change?
1974.
Okay.
The communists supported the military insurrection in order to get out of the colonial war in Africa. We were the last colonial power in Africa. We finally got out in 1975. We had a situation well in hand. There was conflict outside the urban areas, basically in the jungle, but there was no big thing. But because the communists tried to get power after the revolution, the first thing they did was surrender. Okay, we're getting out. We were getting pressure from both the United States and the Soviet Union to leave. But after the revolution, the Americans lost interest in all of our former colonies, and the Soviets took over, especially in Angola. So there was civil war there for over 20 years. So it was not a good situation for everybody involved. And East Timor was taken over by Indonesia. Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique remain very poor countries. And Cape Verde is still very dependent on us for foreign aid because they're a group of volcanic islands. So agriculture is very difficult, and fishing isn't enough to feed everybody or to export. So and since it's volcanic islands, it rains very little there. So we still have cultural ties with all our former colonies, but the period right after the revolution and the end of the colonial war was not a good one. The communists finally did not take over the country. There was a counter-revolution. The CIA was involved. The CIA supported the socialists. I always have a hard time explaining this to people. Why are the CIA getting involved with socialists? Oh. But the socialists split off from the Communist Party very early in the 1960s, back when they were still clandestine. But the founder of the Socialist Party was very much in favor of common markets. They are social democratic politically, so they're that type of Swedish model that some people complain as being too communist, but it isn't really. It's a system where if you have a social state, it is funded because from taxation. From taxation of an open market of goods and services. So it wouldn't work if it was actual socialist. We even have they're social democratic, but we have a social democratic party which is not social democratic. It's the two big parties: the socialists, who are social democratic, and the social democrats, who are conservative. So it gets confusing when I explain this.
I have certain liberties here. Are you're able to own obviously property, or start your own business?
Yes.
How can you put your opinion out there for everybody to hear your thoughts?
Yeah, it's in the Constitution that I can, but there are things that are impolite, and it comes from it's still a holdover from being a monarchy, not a dictatorship, from the monarchy, which goes further back. So it's impolite to say certain things about certain people, which will get you in trouble in court.
But you can say, I don't like the way things are going. It ought to
Yes.
change. You can say
Yes.
that. Okay, well, that's
Yes.
good. So you said 74. That's just a little bit before you were born.
Mhm.
Do your parents or even older, do they tell you, oh, Paulo, it used to be so much better or so much worse? Or
Well, you know how it is. People get used to living in the system as it is. So the trains run on time. That's what they said. Hitler, they made the
Mussolini.
trains run on time. So yeah, they couldn't say things, but it's not like they were being oppressed every minute of every day. They had their own lives. They had jobs. They went out to the supermarket. They went to ball games. They couldn't say stuff, and they couldn't complain about things.
Okay.
So yeah, one thing you have in the United States is that you don't know what it's like to live in a dictatorship. So yeah, it is very confining. But yeah, you have the day to day. You have to survive another day. You have to eat. You have to work. So it's not like you're being watched all the time. You learn how, as you grow up. You learn how to watch yourself and keep a low profile, and everything will be okay. Supposedly.
That's how I've managed to keep my same job for 30 years.
So
Don't-
yeah, you're,
don't-
you're always accountable to somebody for something. It's just that
Yeah.
it's better if it's not the authorities.
Yeah. We have the expression, we don't make waves. I don't know if that translates too well, but
Yeah.
okay, good. Well, Paula, did you have anything else to show us? Or
No, I had taken out a few things, but we've kind of moved beyond that. So I'll
Sure.
probably do that some other time. It's always a good idea to keep something in reserve for other
definitely.
times.
Yeah.
I'll probably even bring out these French comics in case Strange Life doesn't see this and he wants to take a look at it, or if he wants to talk about it. Because they have an interesting history all of their own, and I like to talk about this. I don't like to buy the books, read the books, store away the books, and nowadays I have a lot less time to reread, especially because when you're a kid and you have 20 comics, you go over them all the time, and you take them out of the drawers, and you're always going through them. The more comics you have, the less time you have to think about the old comics that you still own. So going over something for the second time, it becomes harder. But I like to go back and take these out and look at them again. Maybe I'll get a fresh perspective. We're not. It's not the same day as when I bought them, and things changed, and it reminds me of the way some things were, and now they moved in a new direction, and we can go over all the cultural aspects of what allowed these comics to be made. Everybody and how everybody used to act when they were younger, and they first they wanted to do some things, now they want to work on other things, how tastes change, and that's something that I think this is the way that we going back to the theme of preservation. That's how we preserve these comics. We have a duty to go back and not just show their covers. We need to take them out of the mylar, and you have to open them and show the artwork inside and talk a little bit about the history. And I like how Breen always shows wherever he goes, he always shows a little bit of his comics, and he talks about them and where the story goes and what the story meant. And
Right.
that's how we should be going in order to preserve, to show these stories to a new generation.
I agree. Well, Paula, it was great having you on. I don't know how many people will get to watch this. We're kind of early for over here, but this is you've already had lunch and you're ready for supper now. So
yeah, I'm gonna have a toast or something right now, and I'll have lunch at 8:00. Oh, great! Broncos are here.
he's just waking up.
Yeah, fashionably late. We've been here for 2 hours.
Well, we might have to do this again on some Saturday if Saturdays are better for you. So
yeah, it kind of depends if I'm busy or not. Sometimes I may want to now go do something with my friends. Hopefully, there will be Saturdays and Sundays when I'll be working. Depends on on all my shifts are scheduled. For right now, I'll try to show up in one of your Wednesday shows if I have the time.
Well, I'll always send you a link. This
Mhm.
Wednesday, we're going to have some outer space comics, so hopefully people will find that entertaining, and hopefully you can join us for a few minutes before you have to.
Well, I do have a French outer space comic in my hand that I'm going to leave for that show. Okay.
Excellent. All right. So until Wednesday, we will sign off, and we'll see you all later. To those in the chat, thanks for showing up, guys, and happy drawing. We will see you Wednesday at 8 Eastern. Good night or good day.
Bye bye.